My GIF said, I care about you but my friends think you're beneath me. I need someone who fits into my world, not someone I have to make excuses for. So I left her while I rebuilt myself from scratch. What she did next? 18 months with Vanessa felt like living in two different worlds that were slowly drifting apart. I'm Tyler, 28, and I work as a park ranger for Washington State Parks, which means I spend my days maintaining trails, educating visitors about wildlife, and occasionally rescuing hikers who thought flip-flops were appropriate footwear for mountain terrain. Vanessa, 26, is a corporate strategy consultant at one of those downtown Seattle firms where everyone wears suits that cost more than my monthly rent and discusses market disruption over $18 cocktails. When we met at a mutual friend's barbecue, she seemed genuinely fascinated by my stories about encounters with black bears and my passion for environmental conservation, but somewhere along the way, that fascination curdled into something that felt uncomfortably close to embarrassment. 3 months ago, I moved into her upscale Capitol Hill apartment, a decision that made financial sense since my Fremont studio was barely large enough for my hiking gear, but living there made me acutely aware of the gap between our worlds. Her apartment building had a doorman who knew the names of imported cheeses better than I knew my neighbors, and her friends from work and her MBA program had this particular way of asking about my outdoor hobby that made it clear they viewed my career as something I'd eventually outgrow once I got serious about life. Tyler works with nature, Vanessa would say at her work events, the pause before nature, loaded with an apology she thought I couldn't hear. Her friend Madison was particularly skilled at these subtle cuts, asking me things like, have you ever thought about transitioning into environmental consulting? You know, something more scalable, while looking at my thrift store button-down like it was evidence of moral failing. I started noticing how Vanessa would suddenly develop mysterious headaches when her colleagues suggested drinks after work, or how she'd mention that I was busy with ranger stuff when invitations to gallery openings or wine tastings came up. The most telling moment came when her firm's quarterly celebration was scheduled for the same weekend as my favorite annual camping trip, and instead of asking me to skip it, she seemed relieved when I mentioned my plans first. Oh, that's probably for the best anyway, she said, not meeting my eyes. It's going to be pretty corporate and boring. But I could see the relief in her shoulders, the way she immediately started planning her outfit for an event she just called boring, and I realized I wasn't being protected from a dull evening. I was being hidden from her real life. The explosion came after her company's holiday party, an event I'd reluctantly attended in my one decent blazer while surrounded by people who discussed their vacation homes in Whistler and their thoughts on cryptocurrency over appetizers that cost more than my daily wage. I'd spent most of the evening standing awkwardly near the bar, nursing a single beer while Vanessa networked with colleagues who looked at me like I was an interesting anthropological specimen she'd brought for show and tell. When we got home, she was unusually quiet, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor with sharp, agitated steps that told me a conversation was coming. Tyler, we need to talk, she said, pouring herself a large glass of wine with a kind of deliberate precision that meant she'd been rehearsing this moment. About what happened tonight, about us, about where this is all heading. I sat down on her expensive couch, the one I was always afraid to put my feet on, and waited for whatever bomb she'd been holding back. I care about you, I really do, but I can't keep doing this, she began, her voice carrying that controlled tone she used in client presentations. My friends think they think you're beneath me, Tyler. Madison flat out told me I'm dating a dead-end guy who's going to hold me back from my potential, and honestly, I'm starting to see her point. The words hit like cold water, but what stung more was the relief in her voice, like she was finally exhaling after holding her breath for months. I'm tired of making excuses for your job, for your clothes, for why you don't care about the things that matter in my world, she continued, pacing now. Fine dining isn't pretentious, it's networking. Gallery openings aren't boring, they're culture. And I can't build a future with someone I have to constantly defend to people whose opinions actually matter for my career. I watched her gesturing with her wine glass, this woman I thought I knew, and realized she'd been editing herself around me just as much as I'd been shrinking around her friends. So what are you saying exactly? I asked, though I already knew. I'm saying you need to level up, Tyler. Get serious about your career, learn to fit into my world, or we should probably end this because I can't keep pretending that love conquers all when my professional reputation is on the line. She looked at me expectantly, like she was offering me a generous opportunity to transform myself into someone worthy of her time, and in that moment, I understood exactly how little she'd ever actually seen me. I stood up from her couch and walked to the bedroom without saying a word. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa calling my name with increasing urgency, probably expecting tears or bargaining or promises to change, but I felt strangely calm as I pulled my duffel bag from the closet and started folding my clothes with methodical precision. Tyler, what are you doing? We're having a conversation here, she said from the doorway, watching me pack my hiking boots and the flannel shirts she'd always hated. No, you just told me exactly how you feel, I replied, rolling up my sleeping bag and securing it with practiced efficiency. If I'm not good enough as I am, then we want fundamentally different things from life, and there's nothing left to discuss. She followed me around the apartment as I gathered my books, my camping gear, my coffee mug that had never quite fit with her matching dinnerware set, her voice growing more frantic with each item I placed in boxes. This is ridiculous, Tyler. I'm trying to help you see reality. People judge us based on these things whether we like it or not. I loaded my truck in 3 trips while she stood in her designer pajamas, arms crossed against the Seattle chill, looking like she couldn't quite believe I was actually leaving instead of fighting for her approval. You'll regret this, she called out as I secured the last box. You're throwing away something real because your pride is hurt. I paused with my hand on the truck door, looking back at her standing in the doorway of a life I'd never quite belonged to anyway. Vanessa, if you have to change everything about someone to love them, you don't actually love them at all, I said. You love an idea of what they could become for you. As I drove back to my old neighborhood in Fremont, windows down despite the cold, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, relief. For the first time since moving in with her, I could breathe without worrying about being enough. Moving back to my studio apartment felt like putting on clothes that actually fit after months of wearing someone else's wardrobe. Within 2 weeks, I'd enrolled in night classes at Seattle Community College to finish the environmental science degree I'd abandoned years ago when I got caught up in the illusion that formal education mattered less than practical experience. Turns out, having both opened doors I'd never even known existed. My evenings became a rhythm of classes, studying, and rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten while trying to fit into Vanessa's world. I joined the Cascade Hiking Club on a whim, thinking I needed to meet people who didn't see my weekend mountain adventures as charming but impractical hobbies. And that's where I met Emma, a wildlife photographer whose Instagram was filled with images that made my amateur nature shots look like tourist snapshots. You really know these trails, she said after I'd led a group to a hidden waterfall most locals didn't even know existed. Have you ever thought about leading tours professionally? The idea hadn't occurred to me, but within a month, I was running weekend wilderness experiences for small groups, sharing everything I'd learned about Pacific Northwest ecosystems while getting paid to do what I'd always done for free. Emma suggested I start a blog to promote the tours, and what began as simple trip reports somehow evolved into detailed pieces about conservation challenges, wildlife behavior, and the intersection of outdoor recreation and environmental stewardship. I called it Trail Thoughts. And to my surprise, it started gaining traction among outdoor enthusiasts and environmental groups who actually valued knowledge over pedigree. My writing caught the attention of several local conservation organizations, and I began volunteering with groups focused on habitat restoration and environmental education, discovering a community of scientists, activists, and educators who saw my ranger experience as expertise rather than a limitation. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who got excited about the same things that excited me, who understood why spending a weekend removing invasive species was more fulfilling than any networking event could ever be. My social media transformed from apologetic posts about simple pleasures to confident content about environmental issues, trail maintenance projects, and conservation successes that attracted a growing following of people who shared my values. 6 months after leaving Vanessa's apartment, I was writing freelance articles for outdoor magazines, leading tours that booked weeks in advance, and finishing my degree with a GPA that surprised even me. More importantly, I'd found my tribe, people who measured success not by salary or status symbols, but by impact and authenticity. Through mutual friends and the unavoidable social media overlap that comes with any breakup, I started hearing about Vanessa's new relationship with Marcus, a fellow consultant at her firm who apparently checked every box on her perfect partner checklist. Ivy League MBA, family money, the kind of guy who wore expensive watches and talked about wine regions like he'd personally toured them all. On paper, he was everything she'd wanted me to become, and according to our friend Jake, her inner circle absolutely approved of the upgrade. Finally, someone who gets her world, Madison had apparently declared, as if dating within your professional sphere was some kind of evolutionary advancement. But Jake also mentioned, with the careful tone of someone sharing gossip they probably shouldn't, that Vanessa seemed different lately and more stressed, less genuinely happy despite having landed her ideal man. She keeps saying Marcus is perfect for her, but she looks exhausted every time I see them together, he told me over coffee. Like she's performing being happy instead of actually feeling it. I didn't ask for details, but Jake seemed determined to share them anyway, describing dates where Marcus spent more time on his phone than talking to her, treating their relationship like another business transaction that required managing rather than enjoying. Apparently, he had opinions about everything from her workout routine to her career trajectory, offering unsolicited advice about optimizing her performance in ways that made my old habit of forgetting to put my dishes in the dishwasher seem charmingly harmless. The real blow came when Vanessa got passed over for a major promotion at work, despite having crafted the perfect professional image and dating someone who should have enhanced her standing within the company. Jake mentioned she called him crying, questioning whether all her careful social positioning had actually hurt her chances because people saw her as playing politics instead of focusing on results. She said something weird, Jake continued, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. She asked if I thought she'd become someone she didn't recognize, like she'd been so focused on looking successful that she'd forgotten what actually made her happy. Around the same time, my environmental advocacy work started getting local media attention, including a feature in Seattle Met about young conservationists making a difference in the region. The article highlighted my blog, my tour business, and my volunteer work with habitat restoration, complete with photos of me leading a group of kids on a nature walk and explaining how salmon runs connect to urban development patterns. Emma shared the article on her Instagram, tagging me with a caption about how inspiring it was to watch someone build a career around their genuine passions. And somehow that post ended up getting shared widely enough that people from my old life started seeing it. Jake mentioned that Vanessa had seen the article and seemed genuinely surprised by how much I'd accomplished since our breakup. She kept saying she had no idea you were doing all this stuff, he told me. Like she was seeing you clearly for the first time. What struck me most about that comment was the implication that she'd never really seen me at all when we were together, too busy evaluating how I fit into her predetermined life plan to notice what I was actually passionate about. While she was busy trying to optimize her image with the perfect boyfriend, I'd been building something real, a career that mattered to me, relationships based on shared values, and recognition from people whose opinions I actually respected. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd finally gotten everything she thought she wanted, only to discover it felt hollow compared to what we'd actually had. The first contact came through Jake, with the kind of careful casualness that meant it had been orchestrated. "Hey, Vanessa was asking about you," he mentioned during one of our regular coffee meetings. "Just wondering how you're doing, if you're seeing anyone, that kind of thing." I raised an eyebrow at him over my espresso. "And you told her what exactly?" "That you seem really happy and busy with your work." She seemed, I don't know, like she wanted to hear more but didn't want to ask directly. A week later, Emma tagged me in a post about the environmental graduate program I'd been accepted to at University of Colorado Boulder, a 2-year program focused on conservation policy that would perfectly complement the National Park Service position they'd offered me in Rocky Mountain National Park. The opportunity felt like everything I'd been working toward, a chance to combine my field experience with advanced study and move into work that could actually influence environmental policy at a federal level. Within hours of Emma's post going live, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that I quickly realized was Vanessa. "Congratulations on the grad program. Jake told me about Colorado. That's amazing." I stared at the message for a long moment before responding simply, "Thanks." But the messages kept coming over the next few days, each one slightly more personal than the last, testing the boundaries of how much contact I tolerate. "I saw the article about your habitat restoration work. Really impressive. Remember that trail we hiked near Snoqualmie? I drove past it yesterday and thought of you. Would love to catch up sometime if you're free." Finally, she abandoned the pretense and called directly. "Tyler, it's me. I know this is probably weird, but I was wondering if you'd want to grab coffee sometime. Just to catch up as friends." There was something in her voice I'd never heard before, uncertainty, almost desperation masked as casual interest. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe in Capitol Hill, curious more than anything about what she actually wanted. When I walked into the coffee shop, I barely recognized her. She looked polished as always but somehow diminished, like someone wearing a costume that no longer quite fit. "Tyler, you look great," she said, standing to hug me with an enthusiasm that felt forced. "Really great. Colorado must be treating you well." "I haven't moved yet," I said, sitting across from her. "The program doesn't start until fall." We made awkward small talk for a few minutes before she finally got to her real agenda. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about how things ended," she began, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup like it might anchor her. "I realize I might have been too focused on stupid, superficial stuff that doesn't actually matter." I watched her carefully, noting how she couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Meaning what?" "Meaning I've learned to value substance over status. I can see now that what you were doing, your passion for conservation and education, that's real success. Not the corporate climbing and image management I thought mattered so much." The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. "That's good, Vanessa. Personal growth is important." She leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgency that finally revealed what this was really about. "Tyler, I made a mistake. A huge mistake. You were building something meaningful, and I was too shallow to see it. But I see it now, and I was hoping maybe we could try again. I looked at this woman who had once made me feel like I needed to apologize for existing, now asking me to give her another chance because my life had finally shaped itself into something she could respect. Vanessa, I'm moving to Colorado in 3 months to start a new life. Even if I wanted to look backward, which I don't, the timing doesn't work. I could visit, she said quickly. Or maybe I could look into consulting opportunities in Denver. I've been thinking about a change anyway. The desperation was naked now, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and vindication watching someone who had once held all the power in our relationship now scrambling for my attention. The final confrontation came at our mutual friend Lisa's wedding 6 weeks later, a beautiful outdoor ceremony in the San Juan Islands that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with the Pacific Northwest in the first place. I'd brought Sarah, the wildlife photographer turned environmental scientist I'd been seeing for the past 2 months, someone who shared my passion for conservation work and understood why I got excited about things like mycorrhizal networks and salmon habitat restoration. She was brilliant, funny, and had this way of asking questions about my research that showed she was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. When Vanessa spotted us during the cocktail hour, her face went through a series of expressions I recognized from our relationship: surprise, calculation, and finally a determined smile that meant she was about to make a play. "Tyler, I was hoping you'd be here," she said, approaching with a kind of confident stride that suggested she'd had a few drinks for courage. "And you must be Sarah. I'm Vanessa, Tyler's ex-girlfriend." Sarah shook her hand warmly, completely unfazed by the territorial marking. "Nice to meet you. Tyler's told me a lot about you." "All good things, I hope," Vanessa laughed, but her eyes were scanning Sarah like she was conducting a threat assessment. "Tyler's always been generous with his stories." During dinner, I could feel Vanessa watching us from across the room, observing how Sarah and I talked easily about everything from forest succession patterns to terrible hiking trail puns, how she laughed at my stories about teaching kids to identify bird calls, how we shared the kind of comfortable chemistry that comes from actually liking each other as people. When the dancing started, Vanessa made her move, approaching me at the bar while Sarah was catching up with Lisa. "Tyler, can we talk privately for a minute? There's something I need to say." We walked to a quiet corner of the reception venue, overlooking the water where ferries moved like floating cities between the islands. "I've been thinking about what you said at the coffee shop, about moving forward instead of looking backward," she began, her voice carrying that professional presentation tone again. "And I realized something important. I want you to know that I'm proud of you, of everything you've accomplished. I always knew you had this potential, Tyler. Maybe that's why I pushed you so hard back then." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the revisionist history she was constructing in real time. "You think you pushed me towards success?" "Not in the best way, obviously. I was young and handled it terribly, but maybe on some level, I knew you needed to be challenged to reach your full potential. Look at everything you've achieved since we broke up, the graduate program, the Park Service job, all this recognition for your environmental work. Maybe I helped push you toward becoming the person you were meant to be." The sheer audacity of reframing her rejection as career coaching left me speechless for a moment. "Vanessa, you told me I was beneath your social status and that you were embarrassed to introduce me to your colleagues. I was trying to motivate you to aim higher," she said, doubling down on her narrative. "And it worked, didn't it? You're exactly the kind of successful, accomplished man I always knew you could be. We could be perfect together now." I looked at this woman who had once made me feel fundamentally inadequate, now trying to take credit for growth that had happened specifically because I'd escaped her influence. "You want to know what I learned after we broke up?" I said quietly. "I learned the difference between someone who loves who you are and someone who loves who they think you could become for their benefit. You never saw me, Vanessa. You saw a project, a fixer-upper boyfriend who might someday be worthy of your approval if he changed everything about himself." Her confident expression wavered. "That's not fair, Tyler. I cared about you. You cared about your image and how I fit into it. The work I'm doing now, the recognition I'm getting, all of that grew from the same passion for conservation that you dismissed as impractical. Nothing about me fundamentally changed except that I stopped trying to shrink myself to fit your expectations." Sarah appeared beside us then, slipping her hand into mine naturally. "Sorry to interrupt, but they're about to cut the cake and I thought you'd want to see Lisa's reaction to her surprise." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "Vanessa, this is exactly what I mean. Sarah celebrates my work because she shares my values, not because it finally makes me respectable enough for her social circle." Vanessa looked between us, seeing the easy intimacy, the genuine partnership, the way Sarah lit up when I talked about environmental policy instead of looking bored or embarrassed. "She's lucky," Vanessa said finally, her voice small. Actually, I'm the lucky one, Sarah said with a smile that was warm but unmistakably territorial. Tyler's passion for his work is one of the things I love most about him. It's rare to meet someone who's found their authentic calling and has the courage to follow it. As we walked away, I heard Vanessa call my name one last time. Tyler, what if I'd been different? What if I'd supported your work from the beginning? I turned back to look at her, standing alone in her designer dress, finally understanding what she'd lost. Then you would have been someone completely different, and we probably never would have broken up in the first place. But you can't love someone conditionally and then get credit when they flourish without you. Driving back to Seattle the next morning, Sarah and I talked about the wedding, about our upcoming move to Colorado, about the research project we were hoping to collaborate on involving climate change impacts on alpine ecosystems. Your ex seemed pretty shaken up by seeing us together, Sarah observed as we waited for the ferry. I think she finally realized that she threw away something real while chasing something that looked good on paper, I said. But that's not my problem anymore. I spent too many years trying to be enough for someone who would never see me as enough. Now I'm with someone who thinks I'm exactly what she wants as is. Sarah leaned over and kissed my cheek. Smart and passionate and terrible at wedding dancing? Yeah, you're exactly what I want. 6 months later, Emma visited us in Colorado and posted photos of Sarah and me leading a research expedition in Rocky Mountain National Park, both of us doing work we loved in a place that felt like home. Vanessa liked the post, which felt like a final acknowledgement that I'd found exactly where I belonged, not by changing who I was, but by finding people who valued who I'd always been.